Welcome to the Manders Mindset podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome back to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I'm here today with Dorothy Erlanger, and I am so excited to delve down her journey. She completed a triathlon at 73 years old, and I was so fascinated when I heard that. And I am so excited to delve down her journey and her story and all of the mindset shifts that she went through to complete that. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So can you tell us who Dorothy is at the core?
I think at the core, I'm an overcomer. I'm a warrior. I'm somebody that will take on a challenge no matter what, no matter when. And it just relates to many things in my life. And so when I took up my very first, very short triathlon after 50, coming from being a basic couch potato, it intrigued me and I loved it.
So you were a basic couch potato. Can we backtrack? Can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us a little bit about upbringing.
Well, where it really all started is I was born with a limb length difference, and I had very little use of my right hand. So from literally from infancy, basically, I had to kind of figure out my own way of doing things. I used to play basketball with my brothers. Go figure. I just had to learn. When I first started swimming, I literally swam in circles and almost drowned. And so I had to kind of figure that out, and nobody could really explain it to me. I just had to figure it out on my own. So I just grew up and that became very natural to me. And so as challenges came along, I would just find my own way through it or around it. And that applied to career. I mean, I took a challenge where I had a very successful corporate career, and I was offered a position in Brazil as an expat executive. And there were no women working in the industry. And my response was, absolutely. And then when I left the corporation again, I went off into consulting when no one was doing that. People thought I was crazy. And it was, of course, I'm going to do that. And I will figure it out, because that's what you do. You take it step by step. And I will give one hint that, like on that one and on other major decisions of that sort, is I will always ask myself, what's the worst case scenario? And if I can manage that, then set it aside. So if you think about when I left the corporation to go do consulting, which nobody expected me to be able to do anything with, I said, well, what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario was if it didn't work out in about 6 months, I go back and get a corporate job. That was 30 some years ago. So that's one of the basic questions, is to ask yourself that. And if you can live with it, depends on where you are in your life too, then just don't stop thinking about it. Think about other things and move on.
I like that. If you can live with it, then move on. And I want to backtrack a tad. You mentioned you playing basketball with your brothers. How many brothers did you have?
I had two older brothers, and I'm the youngest of four. So I had to fight for my position, so to speak, in the family. And I just grew up very independent. And I think the other thing that happened is, unfortunately, my father had a disabling stroke when I was 3 and died when I was 8. So people weren't particularly focused on me, little Dorothy. They were focused on other issues. And so I kind of did my own thing.
You were young, 8 years old. And did that change, like, even living situation for you? Or what did that change for you?
Really not much. Thankfully, my parents owned their house. And my mom, who had not been working, did go back to work, but originally only part-time, because I was still in grade school. And she was also very independent. Independence runs in women in my family and adventuresome. My mom had a master's in biochemistry. So when she went into research, and she was able to support the family. But I will say this, and this is another curveball, I suppose, but in reality, we all were particularly me, youngest of four. My mom had already put other kids through college. I was literally able to go to the University of Chicago, and what paid for it was my grandfather's Nobel Prize money, which was a most appropriate use of those funds. So that was the only time my mother would touch that, was for education.
And how was schooling for you?
I liked it. I always like a challenge. I ended up going to a 6-year day school on scholarship because we really didn't have any money in St. Louis. And it was a school that really challenged you. There was none of this, oh, it's not cool to be smart and that sort of thing. And you don't even realize when you're going through it just how much you're picking up in terms of your ability to communicate and reason and so on. As a matter of fact, in my case, my entire high school English class were merit finalists. So that was a bit of an interesting environment. So I went on from that. I thought my whole idea is I want to be a doctor. My father was a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor. My uncle was a doctor, so on and so forth. And it wasn't from family pressure. It was that I felt that's what I wanted to do. But as I went through college, I thought, I'm not 100% sure. Do I really want to get on that up escalator that is medical school and internship and residency that goes on forever? And so I decided to do something then that people do a lot now, and it's basically a gap year. Nobody had heard of it then. Dorothy figured it out. And so I gave myself a year. I worked in a research environment, partly research, partly clinical environment, to see what it would be like. And at the end of that year, I came up and said, I don't think I want to go this direction. But it's all that I had prepared for. And as many people do at that particular time of life, I was living with 3 roommates in a condo type of a situation. And one of my roommates that I was talking with about it said, and I did not want to go back to school. And the other option is go back to school and get a master's degree in something. I had no interest whatsoever in that at the time. And she said, if you want to go into something related to industry without a lot of experience, go in through sales. And so that's what I did. And I caught it at a time when they were really just beginning to hire women in professional field selling for various industries. And it was perfect. I built it from there. I moved from sales into marketing and then into international marketing. I had always had an interest in that. I already spoke Spanish when I started that. And so I just and I traveled a little bit, not a lot. And so I got into the international division, and that resulted in the Brazil position. So that was kind of where that came up.
And how was that? I feel like that's a pretty big transition from like doctor, medical. That's a shift. How was that shift for you?
I didn't really think it through the way I would today in terms of a process and decision making and so on. I just had gotten to the point where I knew that it was not going to be the right thing for me and I needed to do something else. And then it was a matter of asking people. And I always say that ask the people around you that you respect and who are going to be what I would call wise advisors, not necessarily a mentor, so to speak, but who know more than you know about the area that you're thinking about, and then delve into that and reach out and see what you can do. And so I had a couple of women who were roommates who worked in sales. And so that was really my basic source of information. They referred me into a recruiting agency. That agency just happened to have a brand new assignment to find professional women for sales. And I ended up in Minnesota, and it was fantastic. It was just great. I'm an adventurer.
I liked how you mentioned a wise advisor.
Yes.
I've never heard that term. I like that. And you said not a mentor, a wise advisor.
Yes, because mentor, people say, oh, find a mentor. But a mentor is on one specific track. What if you decide to diverge from that track? Is that person still going to be the best person for you to go to? Maybe not. So I tend to look at it and say, who are the people that I would turn to who have, instead of finding a mentor to take you all the way through whatever, is to say, who is or who are the best people for me to really understand more about this, to help me make a decision, who can fill in the blanks, so to speak. And that's often not one person.
Even like those coaches for everything today. Yeah.
Precisely. And you don't reach out to a business coach for a personal issue. It's the same. That'd be a great comparison, actually.
Yeah. And it's like there's a coach for every aspect of life, but you're not going to, there's certain topics, like you might touch upon it, but like they're only going to be able to help you with it so much. Your personal life might affect fitness, but they are only going to be able to do so much with that.
Well, and the other thing that I would say, and this is really important, is ditch the naysayers. And I'll give you a perfect example. I made the decision to take that position in Brazil essentially on the spot. I was sitting in Brazil. I finished up a business trip there. I was talking with the general manager, and I suddenly realized that he was putting me through a job interview. And seriously, it was like a late Friday afternoon. I had a midnight flight back to the States and so on. And he asked me a question. He said, I thought I was being very good. I said, well, I'm studying for my MBA in night school, and I'm going to go for a finance MBA, give me an understanding of numbers, what I thought were all the right things. And I saw him sort of sit back and go, and I'm like, what did I say wrong? And he sat forward and he said, what would you do if you were offered a position here now? And in almost a split second, I said, I'd take it in a heartbeat. And then I came back to the States, and everyone was saying, you can't do that. You shouldn't do it. You're going to be the only woman there. It won't work. Everyone around me, my business environment, my boss was trying to talk me out of it. I think he didn't want to lose me. The people that weren't, my mother, she was all for it. She was waiting to come visit me already. And a few other people that I had who were in my environment, and I just had to fundamentally ignore the naysayers and get with the people. Now, doesn't mean you ignore a negative comment if it's well thought out. But if it's not going to help you, then just drop it. Just don't go there.
Is there anything that helped you be able to just drop it?
I had a very strong sense that this was the right thing to do. So I had my own personal, very strong feeling that this was the right thing to do. It would have been pretty hard to push me off of that. I think that if I had any doubts, I would have looked for a bit more of a risk-benefit type of an analysis. And did I talk with people about taking on a position in Brazil, the only woman in the industry? Sure, I did. Of course I did. But I just didn't let it shake me. I think that's the difference. Get a reality sense. But if you are moving towards a shift, get the information, know the downsides, but don't let it shake you if you still feel this is what I need to do.
Have you always been able to not shake the shift or do what you still wanted to do?
It varies. I mean, it depends on the situation and how certain I am. Sometimes it's very clear. And when it's that clear, like it was with that position, that was just super obvious for me. Back when I was making the decision to move off into industry, I wasn't going to get convinced to go on to medical school. I'd made that decision, but I really had no sense of where I was going to go. And so that one was very shaky for quite a while until I got settled into the actual position that I ended up in. And then I realized it was definitely the right thing to do.
I gotcha. So how was that? It was
fantastic. First of all, when I got there, I did not want to end up speaking what is commonly called Portuñol, which is a mixture of Portuguese and Spanish. So for the first year, I refused to speak Spanish at all. I refused to speak it, read it, anything, because I knew I would never sort the two out. And I subscribed to the local language newspaper, and my maid I would have her serve me dinner on a tray while I watched this program that is for the analfabetos, which is the illiterates. So it was very basic, like watching Sesame Street, but a lot drier. I used to watch that because I would pick up on the languaging and the differences. And then I started watching the soap operas. You want to know a great way to pick up daily language? Watch the soap operas or the novellas. So that's what I did. And then I ended up speaking Portuguese perfectly. But the other side of it is, I really find, and this is true in a lot of instances, it really didn't matter that much. I brought in an expertise that they didn't have and that they wanted, and a perspective that they didn't have and that they wanted. They honestly didn't care if I was black, white, or green. And the other thing is, I was not a threat to anyone in that organization because I wasn't Brazilian. So I was not going to be vying for the next 2 levels of positions. I think it would have been worse or more difficult or more challenging for a Brazilian woman to move into that position, at least at that time. Wouldn't be so much so now. So that was the other side to it, is I got the support I needed because I was bringing something they wanted and needed, and that I was going to leave. I mean, they knew I wasn't moving to Brazil permanently. I think those 2 pieces made it pretty easy, and also my attitude. I mean, I just enjoyed the people. I learned the language, which I think is also a matter of respect for the people with whom you're working, and because they don't speak English. And so I think those factors made it not that difficult as you look at it. Was it challenging? Of course it was. I mean, I would go home in the first couple of months and I would be absolutely blotto exhausted from trying to work in a language that I was struggling with, in an environment that I was just getting used to. It was, that sense, it was difficult. But you get past that.
Now, how long were you in Brazil working for?
I was there for about 3 years.
And what made you leave 3 years later?
Oh, I was offered a position back at the headquarters. And back, what had happened is I had hit the proverbial glass ceiling in that company. I was the highest ranking woman in the company at that point, across divisions, and I wasn't going anywhere. And so about 9 months later, and the other thing is this, and companies have a very bad habit of this, there was zero respect for the experience that I'd gained in Brazil. When I did my interview, they were asking about my sales job in Minnesota, and that's when I knew I had a problem. A colleague of mine who had worked in the company had left. She'd moved to Asia with her husband. She'd started a business. She came to me when she came back to the U.S., and this is another one where I made an instant decision, and I just knew it was right. And she said, I really would like to have you. We'd worked together. We had a lot of professional mutual respect. And she said, I really would love to have you join me and anchor the U.S. end of the business. And I made a decision almost on the spot because I had to leave, first of all. I wasn't going anywhere. And it was very frustrating. I thought that was where I made that decision. If it doesn't work out, 6 months, I go back and find a job.
I love that mindset, because so many people are afraid to do anything, whether it's launching a business, quitting a job, going wherever, because of the what if. But it's like you can make another choice if it doesn't work out how you want it to.
Yeah, but it also depends on where you are in your life. If I had been a parent with 2 kids in school, would I have done that? No. It would not have been a smart decision because it was risky. But the only person I was putting at risk was me. So there are times for decisions and there are times to not do things. You always have to assess where you are in your life, what your responsibilities are, all of those things before you go jump off the cliff.
I get that. I get that 100%. I like how you mentioned it was only a few months back I went to Bali, actually, and yeah, it was insane. And I received an opportunity to go on this retreat last minute for free, and my job wasn't going to let me go. So I quit the job to be able to go to Bali. Yes.
There you go.
But The thing is, I'm young, I'm single, I don't have any kids. And that was another factor. I was able to financially afford the plane ticket. And I'm like, 10 years from now, even if this were to happen, I might not be in a circumstance where I can actually go to Bali for 10 days.
That's right.
So, and I literally said to my mom, I'll get another job, worst case scenario. Like, I have a college degree. I'm not stupid. It is what it is. Now is the time for me to do this. I've got nobody that's counting on me. I'll make another decision if it doesn't work.
Exactly. So you do have to look at where you are in your life and your family and other responsibilities. You can't just always go swanning off into the blue on something like this. And you may be able to do it at another time or do something else that also represents an opportunity for you. But that's where each person has to assess the risk level and also your own risk tolerance. Some people would look at what I did and go, are you crazy or what? But that's not who I am. And it's not that I do crazy risks, but I do calculated risks, I guess, would be the way I would put it.
Risk tolerance. That's interesting. I've never heard that term, but
yeah,
it makes sense. Because some people said the same to me. I could never quit a job and leave the country. And I'm like, I don't have anybody relying on me. Now is the time for me to do this in my late 20s. But some people's level of the risk tolerance, they wouldn't take it.
They couldn't even manage traveling alone in many cases because they were brought up in a very protected, nurtured, yes, but protected environment. And I would say almost a fear-generating environment. Watch out for that. Watch out for that. I think some of it's innate as well. So it's just a matter of each person has their own thing. And then people say, oh, I love what you've done. Well, I made a lot of choices that other people wouldn't have made along the way. So, and I will say that when I did go off into consulting, I was already at that time dating the person who eventually became my husband, not much later. And he was very supportive. He was my biggest cheerleader, as a matter of fact. And later on, he became my Sherpa in triathlon. And I'll tell you what that is. It's certainly not a derogatory term. When you're doing triathlons, there's a lot of stuff to organize. And there's travel to organize. And you've got gear and you've got this and that. And it's wonderful to have someone who's there, who's not nervous about a race and worried about where they're going and losing their brain a little bit on stuff. And we call them our Sherpas. And if you have a good Sherpa, it's a blessed thing. So, through much of my triathlon career, Bob was my Sherpa.
I love that. Now, speaking of your triathlons, you mentioned you went from being a couch potato to doing the triathlon. So were you not very active as a kid other than like playing basketball?
Well, the way I describe it when I do speaking, and I do keynote speaking a lot, is to give you an idea of my interest in athletics. When I was in college at the University of Chicago, they actually did have a physical education requirement. And we run a quarter system. I satisfied my PE requirement by taking billiards. Not super active. So, yeah, I was active. My family always went hiking on vacations and stuff like that, but I was never into athletics. And I had really I wasn't fat and sloppy, but I was inactive. I was one of your classic January, this year I'm going to get in shape. 15 days later, bye-bye. People for years. But what happened is I went through ovarian cancer, which was diagnosed when I was in my late 40s. And it was advanced ovarian cancer, which tends to be a killer. And when I finished up my treatment, I found that I was very depressed, very low. I could not get back into anything. I was tired, partly because of the carry forward from 6 months of chemo, but I was just depressed. And unfortunately, I didn't realize, but that is, for those of you who are going through or have gone through chemo, that is often an impact that happens when you finish up treatment, because all of a sudden you're not doing anything about it anymore. You're just sitting there waiting to see if the counts go back up. So, and I saw an item in our local newspaper about a little mini triathlon where they're going to do training for the 50s crowd, 50s and up. And I looked down, I thought, I can swim 300 yards with some practice. It was a pool swim. I have a bike I had in college hanging in the rafters, quite literally. And I can maybe walk a 5K. And I thought maybe if I gave myself a goal to work towards that would help me, and with a group, that it would help me to bring myself out of that. And it did in a very big way. And I got hooked on it. I never told anybody in that group that I had been through cancer, because at that time I wasn't talking to anybody except for family and extraordinarily close friends, because they would have looked at me and said, oh, you're going to be dead in 6 months. I mean, they wouldn't have said it, but that would have been what their thinking was. And I certainly didn't tell clients. And so I went through this training and I got hooked on, first of all, having a goal to work towards and starting to feel better. But the thing that I think that really hooked me, and that still does to today, is that the community around triathlon is fabulous. Wonderful people. I don't care if you're first, last, or in the middle. It's a supportive group. It's a fun group. You might be training with somebody who's a lot faster than you are. They're still there to support you and so on. And so it's the community around it that really got me hooked, and the goal. So I went on from that one little short triathlon to, I think I've done about 40 at this point, up to and actually including an Ironman. Although the first time I tried doing an Ironman, I failed. That was devastating. I missed the swim cutoff by 1 minute. And they stripped the timing chip and sent me to the recovery tent. Frankly, I swore I'd never do an Ironman again. And I didn't for about 3 years. And then I was sitting down with my coach doing some planning for an upcoming season. He says, Dorothy, for most people, I wouldn't even recommend going long, like doing an Ironman. But he said, for you, it's like a piece of unfinished business. And so I said to him, can you train me so that I can finish? And the time? He said, absolutely. He said, first, you were overtrained. Second, you didn't have proper swim coaching. And he said, you do what I say and nothing more, nothing less. And I did an Ironman and I beat the swim cutoff by 30 minutes. And I'm not a fast swimmer, but I learned much more efficient swimming. So that was the story. And then I got away from him, and I was doing a lot of caregiving with my husband, and I got away from almost everything. I did a little bit. So that's why when I did the nationals back in September, I really only had 4 months of training to get back into it. And you have to take it slow. You can't just jump back into it, because my coach's absolute top rule is don't get hurt. And he's right, because get hurt, it's going to knock you out of the game. And so it was almost frustrating to me, because it was like, I think I can do more. He's like, don't. So I got into the nationals and I finished. And here's a piece of news that I didn't know even when we set this up. I have qualified for and will be on Team USA for an international race in Australia this year.
That's so exciting.
It is. And now I'm really training. Now I'm getting into stuff where I'm like, oh, I'm sore. So, and I'm continuing to work with that same coach. By the way, that's another thing. And we talked about coaching earlier. Find a coach, find the right coach. And that's so, so important. So in this case, I asked around I was out with a whole bunch of friends. Some were runners and triathletes and non-athletes. And so on. I said, I need to find a coach who can work well with an older athlete. It's a very different story. And you can work with someone who has been off of training for an extended period of time. So chit-chat around the table, and suddenly somebody came up with the name. And they said, that's who you need to be with. So and he's local. And I wanted somebody local. I didn't want to do strictly online. So.
And then you did this 3 years later after the last time?
I was almost 10 years out of it. Maybe an event a year. a short event year, not even most years, for almost 10 years. And when I qualified for nationals, because I did a short triathlon here in Richmond, and partly because there weren't a lot of people in my age group, I podiumed. I was there. That's the thing. And so I got the offer for nationals, and I looked at it and I thought, you know what? I think I would like to take this on. I think I'm ready to go back to it. I think I'm now ready to take this back on. And that's when I got back into it in a serious way.
And now, how old were you when you did your first one?
I was 51 when I did my first one. Yeah, my very first one. I did the nationals in September at 73. You really can. You can take on a goal late. You can do it. You just have to take it 100 yards at a time. And that is the fundamental message that I get across when I speak to groups, and it sticks. People really come back I've had people come back to me years after a keynote, and they can still cite specific phrases I used, which is great.
Wow. Now, I'm curious if did your arm affect how you were able to do the triathlons?
Oh, yeah.
Like probably swimming.
Swimming, yes. When I first started doing, well, for one thing, I have a bike that is very highly customized to me because normally your main brake is on the right. I don't have grip on the right. So the brakes are swapped, the gears are swapped. We call it cockpit, meaning where the aero bars are, is all adjusted for me so that it fits. But the biggest challenge was open water swimming. Because let's face it, in a pool, all you're doing is following a line down the pool, right? Even that was a challenge when I was a little kid. I say I learned by head wax because nobody could explain to me what to do. So I would veer and go wet, and then I would veer and go wet. Eventually, I figured out how not to do that. But that does not help you when you get into open water because there's no line on the bottom of the pool to follow. So when I first started doing open water swimming, I tell people it was like sine curves. So it took a lot of work. It took a lot of work to adjust that. And it's not absolutely perfect, but it's pretty darn good. And I'm not even sure. I do a lot of sighting, a lot more than most swimmers do. Because when you're swimming in a triathlon in open water, you kind of put your head up and look at where the next buoy is. Now, if I'm naturally a straight swimmer, I might do that occasionally. But for me, I do it frequently. So that if I do need to make any adjustments, I can do it quickly before I go way the heck off course, which has been known to happen. But I just don't want to be swimming a lot of extra distance. I'll put it that way. So the swimming on triathlon, particularly after I got it, because the original one I did was a pool swim, was a big challenge. It was a big step up for me. And it just took work and practice.
Was there anything that helped you persevere and push through?
Yeah, I took it. I didn't try to do really long stuff at first. I mean, the first couple of triathlons that I did that were in a lake, for instance, I did a sprint triathlon. I did a really short one. Swim is 400 yards. If you go off course, it's not that big a deal. And I did a lot of practice in the James River here with somebody with me to coach me and say, you're off, or sight that tree or something like that. It was just a lot of work, a lot of practice. Of course, now there's a cheat sheet, so to speak. I don't have it yet, but just this past year, they've come out with swim goggles that will give you your direction, what degree you're on, just in the last 12 months. And they are expensive. It might be worth it. I did a lot of lake swimming last summer, and I got pretty darn good. I have a friend who lives out on a lake out in the county next to here. I would go out there every Saturday and do a good long swim, and it was fun. And the friends were there, and his wife did a brunch for us after each one. You see, there's a lot of social stuff to this too. And so to get back into it, I did a lot of that last summer.
Since you weren't very active previously, who did this interest come from? Did you have interest in being active and you just weren't?
In growing up, although I wasn't particularly enamored of school sports, I mean, my family always went on camping and hiking vacations. So I did that. And even after college, I did some backpacking and so on. So obviously that was there. It was just what we call it dormant. Life got in the way. Careers got in the way. And so it was a matter of having an event and a group that got me to restart. And then it just felt good. It just felt good to be back in shape. And I will tell you, even in the last 6-8 months, and I was not having a difficulty with balance or anything like that, but I will tell you, I am a lot steadier on my feet now than I was 8 months ago. My strength and balance, without doing a huge amount of work on it, my strength and balance are significantly better than they were. Just from that little stepwise stuff that I've been doing, it makes a very big difference.
Now, you mentioned the event and the group helped you. You think that factor of those two things helped you? Because before you mentioned you were always going to get in shape the start of the new year, but having like this actual specific event that you're doing it for and this community per se.
Man, all the difference in the world. That's night and day difference. I'll tell you, it truly is, because it's like I have a couple of groups, mastermind groups and accountability groups that I work with, makes all the difference in the world. It's the show up factor. And nobody's pressuring you except yourself. But you'll be missed. And you also know that cumulatively it's gonna hold you back. But it really is, it's the factor, it's the community. More than anything else, it was getting back into a group situation, even though I do most of my workouts on my own. But even so, I'm back into a group situation. I've even now signed up to do an indoor track winter team, because it's a group, it's a community, it's an encouragement, no matter what you're doing. And so I think that for anybody, whether it's one accountability partner or a small group, you're going to get out and walk twice a week, that's progress. That's progress. And don't put yourself down if it's only walk around the block. That's still progress. Getting out the door is progress. So that made all the difference in the world for me, to get with a group and to build that community and feel a part of something that wasn't strictly work.
That wasn't strictly work.
Yes. I think many of us tend to get isolated into only our work communities and maybe church or whatever, but to have a community that is based around activity, whether it's walking or hiking or running or triathlon or whatever, just is such a difference.
Yeah. It's almost like a different energy with the people.
Without a question, it's a completely different energy when you show up and there are other folks around. And, for instance, this track team I'm working with, I'm not a sprinter. And everyone on that team is faster than me at a sprint. Now, could they keep up with me on triathlon? Probably not, but that's not their objective. But they're still there cheering me on when I finish a sprint on the practice, and very sincerely. So that's what I mean by that.
It makes so much sense, like the community, even if you've got the new goal, like people even say, telling somebody, not necessarily telling everybody, but even telling that one person to hold you accountable, to check in with, to have that.
Yeah. And the same thing is, I don't care what the goal is. It doesn't have to be a physical goal. I, for instance, have a colleague that I've done a Monday, what are we doing this week? Friday, check in and celebrate for probably going on 4 years. And it's a great setup. We get on the phone on Monday morning and we chit chat. We talk about personal stuff and so on. We know each other's lives very well at this point. She doesn't live here, it's on Zoom. And then we get back together on Friday and say, okay, what'd you get accomplished? And sometimes it's like, I didn't get anything on my list, but I did this other thing. And that's okay. But we literally have I call it bookending the week check-in.
I love that.
Yeah. And that's basically, that's work related. So that's a different sort of thing. It's been the best, absolutely the best.
I think that's so powerful. Post COVID, a lot of community got a little funky. So I think that is amazing. It's forming that community in any aspect.
Yes. Well, in a funny way, and I will say this about the whole COVID thing, I was in a mastermind group today that was just really very powerful discussions with a group of people on mission related things. I have physically met probably only two of the people, maybe three of the people that were in the group today, because it doesn't matter. But we share goals. We're speakers, we're coaches, primarily speakers and authors and consultants, and at a level where it's powerful women. And that's part of what this is about. So in a funny way, would I have had that had it not been that we got shoved into it with COVID? I don't know. I don't think so. So my networks of who the people that I reach out to and rely on now are, many are not even in the United States. So it, in one sense, it closed us down. But if you have established some strong professional relationships, or even personal, but these are primarily professional groups, that of common interest and common goals in the sense of wanting to grow or wanting direction, whatever, this is a pretty diverse group, then Zoom is your friend. So, and of course, during COVID, I ended up, and I'm very highly professional at doing online production for Zoom. I've done events, everything from very high stakes events up to a TEDx. And with doing the background production and paid production for that, I've moved back much more into the keynote speaking area now that things have changed and my situation has changed and there's not as much need for that level because most big events now will be in person, whereas for a while there they weren't. And that took a lot of skill to manage the back of the house, so to speak, which I have, and just sort of build it out of just figuring it out. Speaking of that approach to things.
I love that, though. COVID, it did allow us to spread and connect with people internationally a lot more. And I think a lot of people became more open to that. I love everything you mentioned about community. I think it's so powerful. We can either tap into it or we cannot tap into it, but it makes a difference in every aspect, whether it's physical, professional, personal. We're not meant to be secluded beings, I heard somewhere humans are meant to interact with other humans.
Yes. And we all need that personal in-person. And that's where my local training and my local and certain professionals that I see here, but that creates an in-person. Well, for instance, I did a first day 5K on January 1st. And I saw all kinds of people that I know. I saw people I know from triathlon. I saw people I swim with at the lake. I saw a coach I used to work with and his whole family. And so it was just fun to get back and see those people that I typically wouldn't see in one place anyway. But it just brings back friendships and fun and so on. And you need that too.
It's so true. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. I loved this. You heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yeah.
So he has a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends his podcast with 2 segments. And I end my podcast with those as well. First segment is called The Many Sides to Us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Oh.
What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you as?
Warrior.
What is 1 word that someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
Resilience.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Overcomer.
What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
Pushy.
What is 1 word you're trying to embody right now?
It's not really 1 word, but belief in myself.
Then the next segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in up to a sentence. What is the best advice you've heard or received?
Make your own path. Don't wait and follow somebody else's path.
Why is that the best advice?
Because I would be totally constrained if I was constantly trying to follow what other people have done. It would not be me.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
Worst advice I've ever received it's an interesting one. With triathlon is don't try to do that. You won't be successful. And unfortunately, the best answer I have to that is something I used to have on an identity wristband, which these days, of course, you've got digital. It says, and this is my response is, don't tell me I can't. When my son and daughter-in-law heard that phrase, they just cracked up because they said, that is so you.
I love that. Don't tell me I can't. That's amazing. What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
I'm going to say travel. Oddly enough. The reason being I've been in 45 countries. I've been, I've lived overseas. Would I go and potentially live somewhere else? I might. But do I need to go to this location and that location, some other location? Nope. Been there, done that.
If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be as if someone was reading it, what would you want it to say?
Dorothy totally inspired and motivated me to take on and achieve a goal that I didn't think I could do and that I was afraid of.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be? And I want to know why.
One law for me would be that, and this is going to may sound a little bit odd, but would be everyone needs to have the opportunity to make their own personal choices throughout their lives, not constrained by others and certainly not regulated.
And why would that be the law?
Because I think if you provide, and I'm thinking partly on education, in particular education for women, is just so unevenly spread, and it makes such a difference. It frees people up, it frees their minds, it helps them and their families. And even beyond that, when they become adults, I didn't marry until late. Thankfully, I was in a family where I didn't get pushed about it. A lot of people, that wouldn't be the case. So people's time for their decisions needs to be their own, not pushed or controlled by somebody else. And I think there are way too many situations where it's the other way.
That is so true. Now, I have a personal question. What suggestions, if any, do you have for somebody who's looking to do their first triathlon?
Find a group. Do something short. Don't take on too much. And don't worry about your time. Just figure that you're going to finish. Just figure out that you can do enough to finish. When I went back into triathlon, I literally said, and that actually this is when I qualified for nationals, I had not been doing any running whatsoever. And part of that, I knew the location of the triathlon because I'd done other stuff there. It was a short triathlon. It was a downriver swim. I figured I can float if I can't get there any other way. And I knew the bike course, and it was pretty flat. Find a flat bike course and be ready to walk if you need to. It's only a 5K. You don't get punished for walking. Just be kind to yourself, find a group, and have fun. But do train some, because otherwise you have the potential to get hurt. And what I would say is go find a beginner, even if it's online. Go find a beginner triathlon program. There's plenty of them online that will walk you through what do you need to get done in order to complete your first sprint triathlon. And follow it. And the other thing is this about the triathlon thing. Some people will say, well, I can't swim. That's fine. Put together a team. You can do a team triathlon. One person swims, one person bikes, one person runs. And we have one particular situation here in Richmond where there's the particular triathlon where they do it 3 generations. Grandpa swims, the daughter bikes, the grandson runs. It's great family stuff. So you don't have to be good. You don't even have to do all 3. There's lots of different variations that you can do. You can do a swim bike. They call it an aqua bike. You can, because a lot of people, if you've got bad, you can say, oh, I got bad knees. I say, do an aqua bike. Don't run. So quit the excuses, find something you can do, and go for it.
Oh, I love that. One of my best friends, I had never even heard of triathlons before, Ironmans or any of the things, but one of my best friends that I met this past year actually is really into them, and he's an endurance coach. And yeah, he's all about that. And I've learned so much. It's so fascinating. There's so many things that you can do. People are like, I can't do it because of this. I can't do it because of that. He's like 55 years old. He still does all these. And it's like,
Yep.
you can do it, like, I can't do it because of this. And like, even the bad knees, I've heard people, like, even people look at me and they're like, you're young. I've got friends like 30 years old that are like, oh, I can't do that because I'm like, bro, you're 30 years old. My best friend is like 55 running an Ironman. What's your excuse? Like, stop making excuses.
The other thing I'll say about triathlon is this. It's really not about the sports. It's about what's going on between your ears. Because you can get out there, and if you don't have proper nutrition, it's not so true on a sprint triathlon, but you can really crash out if you don't have the psychology of it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to finish it. I'm prepared for this. And then you get out there and the doubts start, of course. But you have to be, so it's what's going on between your ears and the nutrition you put in your body that can make a huge difference. I don't care how well trained you are, you can still completely mess up in a triathlon. If you perfect swimming, perfect biking, perfect running, but you don't have the psychology to get there. I have a really good friend here who is way better swimmer than I am. He's a good biker and good runner, and he is consistently DNFing, do not finish, on triathlons when he does events, and it's because his head isn't in it. And if you can't fix that, I don't care what you've done with the other stuff. So that's kind of the final thing. It's what's going on between your ears, and in a longer triathlon, it's what you do for nutrition.
Well, thank you so much. I loved this.
Thank you. And I will look forward to seeing the recording so I can break it up and give you kudos for your podcast.
I like to leave it back to the guest. Any final words you want to leave the listeners with?
Well, I guess my final words would be, if I really do love getting this message across to group. So whether it's your association or organization or company, we can have some real fun. Just bring me in and get people excited and have fun and laugh, and also walk away with a message that they can use.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. And where's the best place for listeners to connect with you?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn, which is Dorothy Erlanger. They can connect with me on Facebook or Instagram. Instagram is d.erlanger, and Facebook is Dorothy Erlanger. I'm also up on YouTube, so I will get you the correct links for that. If they want to, I have a 10-step guide to victory giveaway for folks that's very concise, that really walks you through a lot of the things we talked about. And I would love to offer that to your listeners. So I will send you the correct link to put in.
Awesome. And I will link all of that in the show notes for you guys to click directly. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate talking with you. It's fun.
And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Manders Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.